See the full screen view? Okay, excellent. So everybody, I'm watching people sign in, and I'm kind of tickled that I know a lot of people on the call. So thank you for joining us this afternoon. And I'm here to talk through the current status of what's happening culturally with the implementation of SB9, in addition to showing you some research we did in order to see, well, exactly how does this thing work? It kind of says stuff in print, but what's that like in real life? So we've had an opportunity to do that. So in speaker fashion, I'm telling you what I'm going to tell you, and then I'm going to tell you. So I'm going to catch up a little bit of what's been happening in the first 45 days since the law went into effect. And then later I'll come back to some design issues for it. I'm really hoping to cover as much as I can within reason without getting too wonky on detail. So if you have questions, I will welcome them and put them in the chat or save them for the end, and we'll go through it like that. So thank you for letting me do this, Jeff and Marilee, and welcome to some people on the call who I've known for a very long time. So nice to see your names, even if I can't be in a room with you. Okay, so at the risk of being provocative, I have said for a while that SB9 is prompting a civil war in California, and I don't mean of the shooting variety, even though I chose this rather violent image to express it. But I found a tiny parallel between some people think that the Civil War was about a lot of things, but one of them being states' rights, although that was a cloak issue for other things, perhaps. But what's happening in California right now, even since before the law went into effect, is that our many, many, many cities are scrambling to prepare responses to this. And what the response takes the form of is usually an interim or even sometimes an urgency ordinance of how to implement the state law. The state law does allow, as Jeff mentioned, I think it allows local municipalities to add objective standards to be met with any SB9 proposal. It's an interesting territory to discuss what objective means, but there is one really profound, what I call escape clause in the law that says that the cities shall not impose any standard that would keep a person from splitting a lot and creating a duplex with each unit being a minimum of 800 square feet. And I will get into that a little bit more when I show you the illustrations. But I think it's very interesting how cities are trying to find other ways to manage that. This is a screen grab from California YIMBY or YIMBY law. And full disclosure, I happen to be a board member of People for Housing Orange County, which is the local YIMBY chapter. And if you're not familiar with the term YIMBY, you're probably familiar with the term NIMBY. And if you simply change no to yes, you get a YIMBY. So that's what this group does. But our legal arm is monitoring all the cities in California who are preparing interim ordinances. And they're all held here in one place, which is, if you're serious about doing this type of work, this is an extraordinarily helpful document because it sort of outlines things. Most of this is coming from the north, but there's one that I highlighted there is the city of Costa Mesa, which many of us know, right? So I thought that was very interesting. I actually read through the city of Costa Mesa interim urgency ordinance, as they call it. And it's not bad, I'm going to say. This is with the assumption that of understanding the law, and I'll give just a little touch on that in a moment, is critical to being able to apply this. And so the cities are scrambling to understand what's in it. And then when they discover what's in it, they're going, oh, we don't like that. And so they're sort of striking back, hence the tension between state and local that I summarize as a civil conflict, let's say. This one happens to be from the city I live in, which is the fair city of Orange. There's a little local paper that comes to my neighborhood called the Foothills Sentry. and they reported on the City of Orange urgency implementation ordinance. And I just want you to note a couple of words in this document that will sort of point things out. Mitigate is used in the title of the piece. So what do you mitigate? You mitigate something that's a threat, right? So I'm just pointing that out. And then down later, there's actually a paragraph heading that says easing the threat. So the threat is not even cloaked in terms of what this is. There was also an editorial in this same paper written by, I think, one of my council people that said, if ADU law was a bomb, if ADU law tossed a grenade into our backyards, SB9 is a nuclear explosion. So there's a lot of that kind of language that's coming from people who are not thrilled about SB9. But let me back up for a moment and just explain the fundamentals of what's in SB9, and I'll give you a pretty picture to look at. Okay, that one. What SB9 is an attempt to do is create more housing in California on existing property. I've said this for a while, is that the largest untapped resource for the production of affordable housing in the state of California is backyards. Well, some folks, Tony Atkins and Scott Wiener in this case, figured that out and wrote this, albeit imperfect, law in order to encourage the creation of more units. If ADUs created granny flats or additional housing within a neighborhood, then this is a way to just double down on that and take it a little bit further. Here's a fun fact for those of you who are into collecting data. The White House did a webinar a couple of weeks back on the national approach to ADUs. And in that webinar, they used California as the model. So we invent stuff here, my friends, and we export it across the country. I'm just saying. And then sometimes that involves in funding and supporting both policy and sometimes the flow of money that helps to make these things happen. So SB9 does two things. You have a single family house like this one, and you can remodel it by changing as much as 25% of the exterior enclosure of that house, add on to it and divide it. And then it's a duplex. That's kind of one half of the law. And I'm not going to focus on that one because there are an infinite number of examples on how that might work. This part of the law is that if you can split a lot, and on the resulting newly formed lot, you can construct a duplex. And that's the escape clause I mentioned in the law. The cities are theoretically not able to impose any standard that would prevent you from doing a duplex in which each unit was a minimum of 800 square feet. So again, that illustration coming in a moment. So those are the two sides of SB9, and the pushback from it is coming on that second half, the idea of a lot split and the creation of additional houses on it. And so I will just incidentally, I'm going to attempt to be as unpolitical and as unbiased throughout this presentation as possible, even though I said at the very beginning I am a housing advocate. So I think there is some merit and some potentially good things about this law. All right, so this is a single family house on an enormous lot, right? It's like, so if you think about the abilities to split a lot and produce another duplex there, you think it's something like this. Yeah, that might just work, right? And sort of provide some perhaps rental housing in what is clearly a very nice neighborhood. Curiously, many people who are forming the coalition to oppose the state law by proposing a constitutional amendment that returns all zoning control to local cities. That petition is circulating somewhere. You may have seen that. Many of them actually come from big houses on big lots. It's just an interesting observation. But here's something, I love this view of LA, right? And I'm thinking there you get this little cluster of dense stuff up near the top of the screen and a great mountainous skyline, and then miles and miles and miles and miles of bungalowville. And many of these lots are 5,000 square feet or more. You start to ask myself, how big of a lot exactly would it take in order to split it and come up with something that was manageable or viable? And I'm going to show you some illustrations of what we looked at in order to do that. Now, again, the purpose of the law, and just also have to thank my friends at Opticus who crafted this graphic. If the copyright is on there, Opticus out of the Bay Area. They also coined the term missing middle. So I try to use that very cautiously because it's theirs, they copyrighted it. But the idea is certainly not embargoed in any way. And it goes from this. You can all read this and understand what's going on. And what happens is their argument is it's really hard to produce housing in that sort of middle range, right? And the SB9 takes the low end of the middle range, which is duplexes, and sort of turns those into something that anybody can do by right if they have a sufficient sized property. Now, we were curious because in the law, you can split a property as small as 2,400 square feet. And if you think about it, that's just teeny, teeny, tiny. And we looked at that and it was like, there was no viable way to do that and produce anything by the time you got cars circulating on a site that small. So we said, wonder how big that site would need to be. Well, there's another bit of history I want to tell you about. That last year, the city of Los Angeles held an ideas competition called the Low Rise Design Challenge. And in that competition, they proposed a 7,500 square foot lot in Los Angeles, and we could choose it. And on that lot, we could do up to 4 houses. So this was our entry in that actually took a third prize award in our category. But when you look at what we did here, it is a clear anticipation of what SB9 might allow. This is our neighbors are all chipboard houses for the purposes of this model. We chose a 7,500 square foot alley loaded lot in South Los Angeles. And we based our solution on the premise that an existing homeowner lived there and had lived there for a really long time. Is actually based on somebody who works in our office, his Tia Rosa. And the idea was she didn't have a lot of cash, but she was property rich, and she would be able to refinance her property, pull out equity, and construct these other 3 units on the site that then her extended family members would live in. So that was the idea. I will only spend a moment on this. Really, we remodeled the front house. We did not make it into 2 units. So this is not an SB9 solution. And incidentally, this solution is still not legal in California. But then we created a triplex off the alley and with a large shared community space in the middle. So this was intended as sort of a multi-generational extended family compound, if you will. And then it was a few months after this that SB9 and SB10 came into existence. And basically, you could do the same number of units using SB9, but you'd split this property in 2, with 2 in the front and 2 in the back. So I do think that this was the precursor. But now let me show you some studies on what we think it actually takes. So we said, okay, for those of you who do single family, you are probably aware that the most common flat-topped residential site throughout most new developments in Southern California, i.e. is 5,000 square feet. So we said, let's start there because we just dismissed out of hand that we could do this on anything that was much smaller than that. I will tell you this, we couldn't make it work on 5,000 square feet without making things ridiculous. But we made it work in 6,000 square feet. And this is a quick illustration of that possibility. You'll see these houses are like silos because they're tiny footprint, 3 stories tall, okay? Let me talk you through this one. This is like I said, a 6,000 square foot lot front loaded. It uses the premise of having a reciprocal access easement across the driveway that reaches out to the street, and again on the shared sort of backup space that's internal to the site. One of these units under SB9 only needs to park 1 space, so we designed it to that, and you can see the numbers here. These units are very modest. right? A 1-bedroom townhome in 3 stories. So that's a little bit of an unusual offering in a residential market, but you could argue that that will be less, it will be more affordable. It almost becomes naturally occurring affordable housing if one is able to execute on that. Sort of one bigger unit. SB9, I'll fill in law bits as I go through. SB9 does require that the owner of the property to file an affidavit of an intention to occupy the property for 3 years. That's a very interesting premise, and I'll chat through that a little bit when I talk about some of the other possibilities. This just shows you the upper floors. Again, parking on grade, the living, cozy, shared living, kitchen, dining, and then 1 bedroom with a deck. So it was our imagining as ourselves as the client as what we would do. The law actually allows tighter setbacks than we have demonstrated here, but there are some rules in there. Now, a couple things. The FAR of this lot split of 6,000 square feet is, if you take the whole lot into consideration, is 0.675, which for a single family neighborhood can be quite high. City of Los Angeles, in an R1 zone, the FAR limit is 0.5. So this would push that, and it gets into a conversation about how much, which trumps the state law or the local background zoning that you're starting with. And wish I could speak to that specifically, but every single municipality differs on how they interpret that. Okay, so 6,000 was a stretch, all right? But here's an interesting takeaway from this, is our back units say 824, we could trim those up a little bit to get them to 800. And our consideration from interpreting the law was we were able to do this by right, and no other objective standard, say height or FAR, could be applied to this that would keep us from doing it. And that, I think, is the source of a great deal of tension in the cities, which is why they're scrambling to produce their interim implementation ordinances. Because, to go back to that for a moment, it is true that to put a 3-story dwelling into a neighborhood that's predominantly 1-story, it creates lots of issues. There's privacy issues into adjacent backyards. There's issues about, is it in character with the neighborhood? All of these issues are valid, and they are what is propelling a great deal of the resistance to the law. There are other items as well, but those from a strictly strictly rational perspective are a couple of the biggest. All right, so what became really clear to us really quickly was this got easier to do the bigger the lot became. So we just started pushing it a little bit. And this was one hypothetical solution for a 7,500 square foot lot. So this lot that we chose is almost identical to the one that I showed you from the competition earlier. We said, if you're going to do this, it works so much better if you put it on a property that's alley loaded. And there are many of those, and many of those at this size. So in this consideration, it wasn't all 3 stories. We had, most of it was 2 stories with a bit of a 3-story tower in the middle. Again, the reciprocal easement required over the driveway in order to get to the parking, which is sort of more embedded in the site a little bit. And we presumed that the rear house could load from the alley. Well, since the time that we did these studies, I've also been involved through the Government Outreach Committee of AIAOC and have been meeting with planning people, et cetera, to sort of talk about the implementation of SB9 with some of my peers. The City of Los Angeles requires a 20-foot frontage for any newly created lot, which on this project, that would effectively doom this. This would not work in the way things currently are in the city of LA, because they don't consider an alley to be a front to a house. So full disclosure, that is something that has come out in the wash since the time that we laid this out. But you'll recognize the pattern. In the alley load, it's great because the 2 duplexes are completely discrete from one another. The property line just sort of divides right in between them, and you load the alley load from the back. Well, below shows the image of what would happen if you didn't have an alley loaded. And again, the garages are clustered around a shared parking court, and a reciprocal easement would be required, but it's not wide enough to give 20 foot of frontage for that rear lot. So that's a challenge in the city of Los Angeles. I'm very happy to say that our good friends in the city of Costa Mesa anticipated that issue, and they allow a reciprocal easement access over the driveway. So you looking for details like that within each city's local implementation ordinance is really critical, because having studied a bunch of these, that the automobile access to the rear property is a massive driver of the form of the solution. Again, these are still modestly scaled. You can see the sizes there, and the FAR has pushed upward, as you might expect, to 0.84. So we said, okay, well, you know, and there's upper floors. I won't bore you with those townhome stuff. If we're in for a penny, let's be in for a pound, and really push this to a bigger lot. And so we studied a 9,000 square foot lot. And this is our solution that we think is a maximizing the value solution. Again, full disclosure on this one is this couldn't be done in Los Angeles because we do not have 20 foot of frontage for the lot that was created in the back, and alley loaded is still not considered a viable option in LA. Although in AIALA's memo to city planning to address how to implement the ordinance, that is one of the items that we're covering and seeking some sort of flexibility from the city with. Here's, again, those plans. At the top, you see the alley loaded concept. It splits nicely in the middle, two discrete properties that you could do in a city that allowed access from the alley. I have yet to read my whole list and identify one of those. However, if you look at the bottom, in this instance, there is 20 foot of frontage for the rear site. So this would hypothetically work in the city of Los Angeles. It provided that the implementation memo allows the interior setbacks from a lot split line to be less than what might ordinarily be required. So it would typically be 4 feet, and that would make this one tough. But whatever you get is you get the big house in the back and a long skinny house that faces the street. Also, to make this work, a very large curb cut, which might not be everybody's cup of tea either, but it shows you that you can fit this, but I want you to see the numbers. This was conceived as a for sale product. SB9 allows the duplex, newly created duplex, to be sold independently of the house in the front. That's a very big deal with SB9. ADU law, you may know, does not permit the ADU to ever travel separately from the main house. So that's a pretty important distinction. Oh, told you I would share you fun facts. The webinar from Washington, D.C. that uses California as a model also said that of the tens of thousands of ADUs that have been completed in California since 2018, 70% of them are rented by third parties. So when they removed the owner residency requirement from the ADU law, permitting and production of them exploded. So now the federal government is trying to figure out how to do that across the country. Again, just walking up the house. I won't bore you with all that. Okay, so that is a quick presentation of what's happening, and I can go back and review any of those things with you. But if you were doing this, and this is where I want to provide some advice on this, number one is familiarize yourself with what the law actually says, right? Because in many of the presentations I see that are contrary to the law, including a lot of stuff that's coming out of the group that's trying to do the constitutional amendment, is just not accurate. For example, the law is, what's the word I want? The law is silent on whether you can also then produce an ADU after you've split a lot. So you can picture, even in our 9,000 foot example with those big for sale houses, there's no real estate left, right? And this is assuming we can get around the FAR and around a few other things. The issue with idealized hypothetical projects, right? So the law says that it does cover the one parking space unless you are within a quarter mile of a transit that has pickups at least every 15 minutes, in which case you don't have to park it, which is very similar to ADU law. There are aspects of SB9 that are ministerial, and again, that is the fly in the ointment that creates a lot of irritation, because cities are trying to, in some of the implementation ordinances, cities are trying to generate something that requires design review for the proposed lot splits and new units, and typically that's described as an intention of trying to preserve the harmony of the neighborhood. And again, the points on both sides are valid. But I want to make another point, that if you go back, if you think about how we started the competition piece, which is the fourplex on 7,500 square feet, there's an opportunity here that already some groups are figuring out, that there are many, many, many neighborhoods that have maturing homeowners. Often these are communities of color, and the people are cash poor and property rich because they've lived in their houses for a long time and they have been paid off. And there's the idea that we talked about, that someone could come in, and there are people who are proposing this, to come in a shared equity solution, whereby someone purchases a lot of your equity without displacing you, the resident, as the owner of the home, and pulls that money and finances and gives development assistance to produce the lot split and the additional units. And then the proceeds return to the owner proportionately to what the equity investor has put into the property. That allows there to be an on-site owner for 3 years without with that makes that work pretty well. But the thing that I like about that is it creates an opportunity to allow a multi-generational extended family compound, because someone has lived there for a long time. And I see a potential solution that keeps people in their neighborhoods. And so again, as a housing advocate, it's something that I think is really interesting, because the model site for our solution was actually more like 8,500 square feet, and it was in East Los Angeles. We just transported its owner and its idea to South LA for the purposes of that. And in that neighborhood, people end up, they can't afford those houses because of the cost of the property. And so they end up moving away from their family. And I like the potential of this to keep communities intact, actually. And depending on which side of the fence you find yourself, in terms of you think this is a great law, you think this is a terrible law, it's going to be just like the ADU law when it was initially, hit the marketplace. It was almost impossible, and nobody did them, right? And so it had to go back to the legislature for a redraw like 4 times. And it was about on the 4th time that they came up with, that they managed to remove the owner resident requirement. And then, as I said before, the production of ADUs just exploded. My prediction for SB9 is it also needs a little bit more time in the oven, and the issues that are being explored and pulled out in this process of the reactions from cities are bringing very, very sharp and focused attention to the issues that the law has that create tension among people. Now, there's plenty of room for disagreement on these things. And as I mentioned before, I do think some of the basic premises that people are objecting to are reasonable, and I'm not trying to dismiss any of the resistance, but what I think is that it's possible that this will mean more in some neighborhoods than in other neighborhoods. And I am concerned about if, for example, the constitutional amendment got on the ballot and then was approved, and we actually amended our constitution to return all zoning to local control, that would undo not only SB9, but most other affordable affordably based bonus density programs currently operating in California. It's a blunt instrument, and I think that we need something with a little bit more finesse than that. So that's the bulk of what I wanted to talk to you about, and give you some ideas of what the playing field is like right now. We've been getting calls on, I've been talking about it a lot. So we've been getting calls on SB9, and it's interesting because I don't think I have yet had a call from anybody where I worked through on their property and it made sense. Oh, I take that back. I now have one. I have one property owner who has a property in Orange that's of a sufficient size and location that I think SB9 would be a possibility. However, the path to it there is unclear because of the urgency ordinance in the city of Orange. And so the default to an ADU plus a junior ADU looks extremely attractive because that still gives you additional dwellings that can then add to the stock in the neighborhood. It's ministerial, and it's a lot of people are doing it, and it's relatively low impact, I want to suggest. So there are more things that I could say, but I want to pause for a moment, Jeff, and see if anybody has any questions at this point, because I know I've gone pretty fast with a lot of dense information.
Yeah, Daniel, you do have one in chat, and it's a repeat of what you stated earlier, just to get the facts straight. Would you repeat the info on height? Did you say the city can place a height limit, or SB9 won't allow height limits?
That is a great question. Thank you for whoever asked that. I think that it is murky. The law does not specifically say that. And so what the local municipalities are doing at the moment, reasonably so, is trying to figure out how this law can interface in a decent way with their own sort of zoning expectations. At the time that we did the studies, our reading of the state law was the municipality could not impose any, even first off, it had to be an objective standard, which is not design review, is what that means. But they could not do anything that would limit me from producing a duplex on a lot split with 800 square foot units in it. So what we took that as a window to say, okay, well, you know, we're architects and we do housing. So what would it take to do, you know, a duplex with 800 square foot units? What's the smallest piece of property I can do that on? How do you solve that? Well, in our case, tiny footprint, tall building. And okay, to get to 800 square feet on that size of property, it was necessary to go 3 stories. Our comprehension of the law was that it allowed that because it said you cannot restrict that. So that's going to be subject to lots of interpretation. Incidentally, just like any good piece of legislation, it gets challenged the good old-fashioned way through lawsuits. And already there are lawsuits in play by property owners who are objecting to some of the local implementation ordinances using the argument that it is a taking of available value of property to essentially constrict the production of the SB9 housing that the state law would otherwise entitle them to. And I have a specific example. In the city of Orange, again, forgive me for quoting my own city all the time, there are 2 limitations that I think are potentially in conflict with the intention of the state law. Number 1, the minimum lot size in the city of Orange is 7,500 square feet. I'm going, okay, well, that's a good start because I've studied that 2 or 3 different ways and I know how you can solve for that. But they also limit the size of the new units, and they limit them to 1 story, which effectively eviscerates the law. So it's challenging, and you have to see how all these things work together. That's why in our process, we study these hypothetical solutions on these different size lots in order to see what it meant. I also opened this lecture with that estate property, showing you get in the 10,000, 12,000 square foot range. It's simple, right? And it's like, it's easy to do because you have access to all the things you need to do, provided you're not a steeply sloping site and you're not in a coastal zone, a historic district, a high fire hazard area, a wetlands, or any other environmentally protected neighborhood, of which there are a few. There's a city, I believe it's the city of Redwood. I don't have it all memorized, that attempted to get their entire city classified as a high fire hazard area just to make SB9 go away. So some of that is going on. Did I answer the question? I think I did.
I think so. There's a couple more questions in here. Both of them have to do with lot splits. So I'll kind of ask them at the same time. The first one is owner occupied only required for lot split. The second is any info regarding how lenders of existing properties look at lot splitting.
Yeah, okay. So I'm going to take the one I know I can answer, I think, first. The owner occupant only required for the lot split. I don't think so. I think it's required for even the just creating a duplex out of an existing single family house. I wouldn't swear to that on a stack of Bibles. I would have to go back and recheck the law, but I'm pretty sure it applies to both. Yeah, thank you, Jordan. I saw that giggle. The other question is really fascinating. Any information regarding how lenders of existing properties look at lot splitting? Well, as I talk to people who are in that space and see them proposing these interesting alternative solutions, like the law, for example, if I do a lot split on my property, then I can't also buy the property next door and do a lot split there, not as the same owner. The law specifically prohibits that. That's the anti-evil rich developer from out of town clause in the law. However, already, like clever people do, folks are finding ways around that, including the aforementioned thing with the shared equity solution that gets the housing produced while the original property owner retains title to the house for the 3-year period. I know of another case. I've seen this. People are doing this and finding interesting ways to work around. Some are also proposing creating LLCs with existing owners in order to keep them in the property. So people who want to do this will find ways to do it. But let's talk about the lending specifically. There is a movement. For example, I was able to moderate a panel last week on, it was theoretically about sustainability, right? And one of the items that came up on multiple occasions were the investors in multifamily properties were requiring a certain level of sustainable, it's the whole ESG movement. And so more and more lenders, people with equity, are being influenced in such a way that they want to use the money. You can go out right now and get a credit card that pays 1% to a zero carbon fund, right? And they're trying to sell a credit card based on its sustainable footprint. And I think and I won't get into a discussion of all of that, other than to say there are more and more lenders looking favorably on what might be classified as social impact lending. And I do believe that the model of finding cash poor but property rich long-term owners with big lots and tiny houses is going to attract capital, whether from high net worth individuals or other more classic traditional lenders. So that's what I see happening. But I know that a lot of people trying to figure that one out right now.
And I do see Jordan has his hand up.
I'm bracing myself for what Jordan's going to ask me.
It's easy, Daniel. It's easy. On the lending thing, I would think that you would probably close out your original loan and probably write 2 new loans, by the way. And then, but you had 2 comments about how cities are trying to get ahead of this.
Yes.
I think the 20-foot setback in LA is a brilliant one. What was the other one? You said the city was precluding easements, access easements?
That's Los Angeles. It's a 20-foot frontage, Jordan.
Yeah.
So when I showed all those lots with the duplex on the alley, that rear duplex has to have literally a flag that goes to the street that serves the property, and it has to be 20 feet wide. And they are utterly, completely inflexible on that at the moment, because I was there because I met with planning and heard them explain that to us. But as we are in the implementation memo that AIA is preparing for Los Angeles, we are trying to address that issue because it's very restrictive.
Now, has any jurisdiction actually tried to preclude access easements as another mechanism? LA's solution essentially does that, because on the solutions we were showing,
would be consistent with the city of Costa Mesa and with work I've done before, like ages ago. It's not an unusual thing. And if you're in, those of you who are in retail know that reciprocal access easements exist all over the place, right?
Residentially, they do too.
No, they do. And
Sidewalks.
it's, yeah. And I think that will be, hopefully more cities will not come up with that as a restriction. That's why I said, as I read through Costa Mesa, I think Costa Mesa's implementation ordinance is really pretty reasonable.
Okay, good. I'll review it. Thanks. Good topic.
You've got another question here in the chat. Are either SB9 allowed in high fire hazard zones?
Yeah, great question. And I can see the person asking that. So ADUs are not limited by any of the things that I mentioned that limit SB9. Again, full disclosure, I happen to live in a historic neighborhood. So it does, I've scoped my backyard like on multiple occasions to see if I could do this, but I can't. So it's historic zones, coastal zones, high fire hazard areas, wetlands, and those are the biggies. And there are 4 or 5 more that get progressively more obscure in terms of how many properties fall into that. Was it Terwilliger? Somebody did a study on this about a year ago, and they analyzed the 7.5 million single family lots in the state of California. And based on the economics of these solutions and the lot sizes and the restricted zones and et cetera, they identified a total potential of perhaps 700,000 units that could be created under this law. And then they put it through the filter of what is financially feasible. I can't recite how they did that. The number reduced to 400,000. So people are finding needles in haystacks in terms of properties where this law will actually produce the additional housing that was at its heart when it was written. So no SB9 in a high fire hazard area.
And I am not seeing any hands raised or other questions right at the moment.
Okay, so let me see if there's anything that's really useful to know. There is a company, you might want to check this out, and I'm not cross promoting people, but there is a company in Los Angeles that is working on an algorithm. I see Stefan S. Let me answer his question, then I'll go on to the algorithm. Is if you are in a local coastal zone, forgive me for this mushy answer, but it says up in the front part of the law, it says you cannot apply this, and then down in the law, it's almost like there's a copy, a copy paste error, because it says if you're in a coastal zone, you are not subject to a full board hearing, but rather it's handled at the staff level. So that's one of the things in the law that is a contradiction, right? There's a couple, that's the most obvious one, but it's a great question. Generally speaking, that will be something that is it's certainly implemented by the local agency implementation ordinance. On the slide I showed that had all these cities, another one was in Southern California. It's one of the beach cities south of San Clemente, and they have declared their entire city a coastal zone in order that SB9 might not apply. So you're going to see a lot of that. Newport Beach is about 1/3 coastal zone, for example. And Brian Jeanette, do the setbacks mimic the ADU setbacks? Brian, I think there's some opportunity for interpretation on that one. It's the cities are in the implementation ordinances, many of them are trying to have the underlying zoning govern, and the things that I see as the biggest challenges, if that's the case, are height FAR and setbacks. ADU is great. If you do an ADU, you get a 4-foot setback, done, right? And certain size limits or whatever, but that's not clearly expressed in the SB9 law. So it would be one to interpret whatever city you're thinking of doing it in. Research to see what the status of their implementation ordinance is, and that will give you. You have to put the two things together. It's a lot of wonky brain work to interpret the two things, but that's the best way to do that. Oh, great. Another question. So thank you guys for the questions. These are excellent questions. Don asks, are lot splits in single family zoning only? What about multifamily zoning? Great question. And I told you we've been fielding calls from people to consider properties. 9 out of 10 of the stuff I looked at was not single family zoned. It's like, my friend, you've already got an R3. So you get 3 units by right on this property. So why don't you do that? Oh, and you know what? While you're doing that, you also get 1 or sometimes 2 freestanding ADUs on that triplex site. So I've been steering a lot of people back to the ADU law that are not in R1 zones. So yes, it is, the lot split is in single family zoning only. And by the way, if you've already done an ADU on your single family property, you are not eligible for SB9 lot split. So multifamily, don't split the lot, but you can add up to 25% of the total number of units in ADUs, including a certain percentage of detached. Talking to more multifamily people who are considering mature properties that are overparked. Anyway, I can get more detail on that, but I don't want to talk about ADUs because we're talking about SB9 today. These are great questions. Okay, the algorithm. There is a company in LA, it's called Brickwork, and for a long time you could contact them and tell them what your property was, and they would produce an ADU report for you, which indicated how many and kind of how big your ADUs could be. And they were getting interest. The interest that people had in this came from, I said that specters, high net worth individuals, people who are investors were wanting to know that. They are currently working on an algorithm that applies the same way to SB9 law. They're currently limited to Los Angeles and some connected cities and LA County, but it would be a very, very interesting resource to discover the potentiality of the site that you have. But for the architects on the call, and I know there are a ton of you, it's like you have to do in figure skating, you have to do the compulsories before you do the free skate, right? So look at the law, like really go through the law and understand it, and then the implementation ordinances as well. And I would go one step further to say this. If you're an architect and you are doing housing and you have an appetite to do this type of project, I would encourage you to engage with your local municipality to help them shape their implementation ordinance. And I'm speaking to the people on the call who support the law in general, right? So that's something that we would encourage us to do, especially I'm looking at some of my peers on this call that we've been doing this for a while, and you bring a lot of credence and plausibility to the discussions with planning, which is why I think it would be a great investment of time. Oh, okay, another question. Do all new units built under SB9 have to comply with net zero residential requirements? No, the law is silent on that point, but you're going to predict my response now is City of Santa Barbara, for example, is adding the requirement that the units be deed restricted to be affordable to people making less than 80% AMI. So in the state law has no affordability restrictions nor bonuses for affordability in it, but some of the objections that have been presented are that the law is silent on that and is not providing the requirement, unlike SB 1818 or SB 2345 that are, I would consider those the multifamily bonus density based on affordability ordinances, which have been have helped to produce a great deal of housing in California. So it's a great question. By the way, this one's just for free because it's a little off topic, but I just saw today that the Los Angeles City Council is urging the city who makes their own tweaks to the California Building Code, which makes its own tweaks to the International Building Code, to require all new buildings to be zero carbon. And that's being taken up by the city council like maybe next week. So I think that it's very, it's very aggressive. And those of you who are doing buildings and grappling with those issues know how complicated and expensive that process can potentially be. But all codes are moving in that direction. And then, as I said before, we're California, we think it up and then we export it to the rest of the country right along with our people. So that's something that you can look forward and look to in the future. It'll be interesting how long it will take for the federal government to pick up on the SB9 phenomenon and then give it the same kid glove approach it's been doing to ADUs. Although one might note, it took an administration change and about 4 years for it to make it out of the, it was HUD and a bunch of financing. Incidentally, somebody asked me the financing question. HFHA, am I saying that wrong? FHA, there's a federal, Fannie Mae. Fannie Mae has a unique lending program for lower income individuals to finance the production of accessory dwelling units. California Housing Finance Authority has a similar thing. So they're moving in the direction of trying to equip those, I'm going to classify the people that I said who are cash poor, property rich, to have enhanced loan instruments to enable them to produce additional dwelling units on their property. So that can't be far behind in the SB9 implementation strategies. One enormous difference between the two laws is one thing we are seeing is we have several on the board right now of new housing subdivisions that have new build ADUs in them. So the houses are showing up from day one with an ADU on the lot, even including in some build to rent products. So you can do a whole subdivision of ADU solutions. At this point, we have not been able to discern a way that you could do a subdivision of SB9. So I think, Jeff, that may have exhausted all of my talking points. I'm not sure. I want to say thank you to everybody for the questions. They were really, really, really good. And I'm going to say, I'm going to put my email into the chat. And if you would like to take a deeper dive into the YIMBY table that may give you some information on what the implementation is in your neighborhood, I would be happy to share that with you on an individual basis. The organization is a little bit reluctant to have it on social because it's still being worked on at the moment. Oh, I do have a closing shot. Many of you, if you're doing housing, you are familiar with RENA and housing elements. Did you know this? Did you know that housing elements are on a rolling calendar through the state that starts in the south and moves to the north? Many Orange County cities have already submitted. Actually, first they got delayed, and then they've submitted it, and it keeps extending the deadline. But most of them are past the public input process. In the Bay Area right now, they're just accepting public input on housing elements, and you will note that some housing elements count ADUs as part of the housing units that the city is supposed to produce. So that's something to watch for as well. So if you're studying SB9 law, local implementation ordinance, also be familiar with your city's housing element. Sorry, that's a lot of homework, but that's what it takes to do this. And I will put my email in the chat.
Thank you, Dan. You have a lot of little nice responses in chat. If you'd like to read them before this closes.
I see that, and I say thank you all for saying that. It is something that I almost accidentally became passionate about and knowledgeable about. But I'm very, you can tell I'm not a man of few words, so I'm very eager to share what I know and what I've learned, even as I continue to polish it and digest it. So, Jeff.
Yes. Very good program. I see lots of thank yous. Let's see if we got any other hands up.
Jeff, did you see all the questions in chat? I'm sorry, I wasn't paying attention at the end about the
Yes.
coastal question.
Yes.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Yeah, I think you got all of them.
Yeah, yeah.
And please, if a question was missed, chat sometimes scrolls pretty quick. Just go ahead and pull yourself off mute and you can go ahead and ask the question.
I must have done a darn fine job, Jeff, of explaining
Yes,
things.
you did.
Yeah, it's just, there's a density of information. And when I look at the YIMBY list and try to look at the cities I'm working in to just try to stay up with their implementation ordinances. So when I'm getting calls on the phone, and some of you are getting those too, that you can step people through. I left out one slide, and maybe I'll finish with this, is I've been doing a lot of policy related stuff lately. And one of the things that has become very, very clear to me is, for those in the development community, and that may be some of you on the call, we're typically architects and we're working for people in the development community. But if you're looking to do SB9 projects, go where you're wanted, right? Go into a city that's making it easier for you to do it and not one that's making it an uphill climb. And we just have to do our homework in order to know that. And then it's very interesting because in those cities, you will see neighborhoods begin to evolve. And the hope of my heart is that this will really, in those communities that are a bit friendlier to it. And I'm thinking Garden Grove, Santa Ana, a couple others, that I'm really hoping that these will provide some tools for people in communities of color to be able to do those multi-generational extended family compounds and keep their adult children near them. So there's hoping. I can be an optimist, right?
Thank you, Daniel. Great conversation.
Thank you, Jordan. Yeah, we are right at the hour. Thank you again, Daniel. That's very good. And so if anybody has any further questions, if you scroll back a little ways in chat, Daniel did provide his email address. You could always email me as well if you wanted, and I'll connect the two of you.
Or you can find me on LinkedIn.
There we go. Okay. Well, thank you again. I see no other questions. So at this point, everyone, have a very good week. Happy Valentine's Day. And we look forward to seeing you in the next AI Orange County program.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.